Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and welcome to another episode of testing the limits of various DDR5 memory chips. Today we're going to be taking a look at the limits of SK Hynix 16 gigabit MDI. We're using the MSI Z690 Unify X motherboard again, provided by MSI, so thank you to them for the board. The memory kit is a Corsair Vengeance engineering sample kit that, this is the better of the two kits that I got for the Corsair overclocking competition that was on HardwareBot a while ago. Yeah, and so these haven't really been featured in many videos because these are the good sticks. So I've been mainly using the bad ones. Basically while the competition was running, I was using the bad sticks for everything. That actually ended up being a video at Ambient, because I was saving these for the competition. But anyway, yeah, so now we're like using these. I'm not sure that these are necessarily the absolute best SK Hynix stims that I have. I also have some engineering samples from Gigabyte, but those use a really messed up power management chip that really doesn't play well with MSI boards. So yeah, we're gonna use Corsair because otherwise it's weird. The CPU is a 12900K. It's on air cooling, so it's at 4.8 gigahertz, but we're just running memtest, so that doesn't really matter that much. And yeah, so that's the hardware in this setup. And now let's go to, let's get to the testing. So yeah, we've got memtest set up. We'll just start that. We're at 6800 megabits per second, 32, 40, 40, 28, 2T. I've taken care of the primary timings already because, well, the thing is, the primary timings, in my experience with Hynix DIMMs, are sort of where you're going to find the most variance. So they're unfortunate, we will mess around with the TRCD a bit, but TCL requires that you retrain the whole system, and so we're not going to deal, well, actually we might mess with the cast write latency, because that can sometimes go very, very low on Hynix DIMMs, but yeah, anyway, this will be, I don't know how this video will go, because I've been working with SK Hynix DDR5, in my opinion, entirely too much. At this point, I'm pretty bored of it, so where are we going to start? Let's just go straight for the easy ones. 4, where's my TFAW? 16, apply. That's actually wacky that it trained 32 TFAW, but the TRRDs weren't correct for that. Well, whatever. Then, of course, we're going to max out our refresh interval, which is going to significantly speed up memtest. Or maybe not. Oh, no, it is boosting it. It takes a while to kick in. Anyway, then we're going to drop TRFC to 333, which is just sort of what I always use. We're just going to start straight off with, the safe timings for SK Hynix, so we're going to go straight to 12, 7, 18, 18. You can generally go lower on those, then we're going to go all the way down to 10. Yeah, we're going to start with, the safe settings. Oh, this one I need to actually punch in, 60. We're going to start with 46 on that one. I'm just going to apply all of it. Oh, it did not like that. I wonder what did it. Because that should work. The thing is, also applying the timings while you're running a stress test doesn't necessarily always work out that great, so I'll try punching all the timings with memtest not running, and then we'll start it. Because I don't think I punched in anything that shouldn't work at 6800, considering we're at 1.5 volts on the memory, and there is a fan on it. Yeah, 12 is fine, which it should be. Oh, it might have been the 18s. 12, okay. 9? Yeah. 7? Yeah, that's fine. So then probably these then. Or it was the fact that I did it... Yeah, it was those two. Yeah, at lower speeds, those can be lower, but at like 6800, there's not much headroom in them. Well, that solves that problem. I do distinctly remember that generally I leave those two timings on auto when setting up like stable settings, but now we know why. um, yeah, so if we hit it, yeah, that's fine. And then if I punch in, this should do 60 and like 44. Yeah, that's also fine. It really is just the read to write timings that it doesn't like at this speed. Like 19 is probably okay, but man, going from 20 to 19 is kind of a waste of time and effort, but like if this wasn't like let's say you made this adjustment and then you wanted to pass a stress test and it wasn't passing, I would just give up on it. Like it going from 20 to 19 is a waste of like spending a bunch of time trying to make an adjustment of like 20 to 19 work, pointless. Utterly pointless. You're never going to notice. Anyway, we're going to do 177 just so that the OS has some RAM left over for things not to slow down too much. Just going to max that. And we're going to drop to 333. You can actually go lower than 333, but well, that's kind of the point of this video, I guess, today. We're going to check where you really start getting errors on the refresh cycle. Wait for all of that to start up. So there's all of these power down. So all of the different PDEN timings are power down enable. And we should be able to drop all of those to 4. Yeah. Including this one right here. Yeah, so I spent a bit more time studying the Intel documentation, and I realized, wait a minute, like the whole, well, yeah. So these are like the PDEN is just power down, like entry and exit timings, and also I have power down disabled on the board right now. So these really shouldn't actually be doing anything currently, but yeah. Like if the power down mode was enabled, this can help with performance a little bit, because basically when the memory, like what power down mode is, it just shuts down some of the IO of the memory chips. And so when you go to like access the memory, the IO needs to start up again, which is the whole exit power down process. And then there's a bit of a delay before you can do anything when you first wake up the memory, which is actually what like the TXP timing is for. This is exit power down. And you can generally set that to 4. Like if you have a motherboard where you can't just straight up disable the power down mode, setting that to 4 will improve your memory latency. But if your motherboard lets you just disable power down, this shouldn't really do anything. Anyway, we have TRFC per bank, which can generally be 100 lower than your TRFC on Hynix DIMMs. So, yeah, this isn't really finding the limits. This is just like punching in generic Hynix timings. Oh boy. Like, it was fun on the Micron and the Samsung DIMMs because I was actually discovering new things, but here it's just like, I already know what this does. I've been using this memory entirely too much. RTP should do 4. I don't think it'll do it while memtest is running, though. Actually, it might not do it at 6800. Oh, whoa, yeah, I properly crashed the system here. I bet I crashed it. Oh no, the power button still works. So it is actually possible on some Intel platform, like some motherboards or some Intel motherboards, to crash the CPU so hard that the power button stops working. Like hold the power button for 10 seconds doesn't do anything. You can sit there holding the power button all day and it will never turn off because the CPU is just so incredibly crashed. But I think also that depends maybe on how the motherboard implements the power button. I have a sneaking suspicion that some boards just have like a backup system for if the CPU is crashed way too hard. Because otherwise you need to just straight up power cycle the power supply. Anyway, so we're back. So I'm going to actually set the RTP first thing. Because that really should do 4. Yeah, so you just can't do that while memtest is running, which makes sense. Like, you know, fair enough. Set that to 4. Oh, no. No, 4. Set that to 4. Set this to 4. Oh, TWR is now completely broken. That's fun. TXP to 4. Refresh cycle per, like this is per bank refresh cycle, which the idea behind this is that instead of refreshing the entire memory rank, you can actually refresh just specific banks in the, or actually I think it's like a specific set of banks in the memory, which means you can still keep reading and writing while doing a per bank refresh, which isn't true for a full refresh, because during a full refresh the entire thing is well, like the whole memory chip, like the entire memory channel. Well, depends on how the memory controller is implemented, but at least for the whichever memory chips are refreshing, completely inaccessible if they're doing a full refresh. You can't read or write or anything. So yeah. Anyway, that's also why like the refresh interval, or like if you have refresh interval, this is way more effective at reducing your memory latency than your refresh timing. But if you have a like Ryzen CPU where you can't change your refresh interval, lowering the refresh cycle helps your latency because you spend less time with the memory inaccessible. And the way the most memory benchmarks work is that they sort of measure the average time to access the memory. For a very short burst. So yeah, the less time the memory spends refreshing, the lower it the less time it takes on average to do like one read burst. So actually, this could go even like 5644 probably. Yeah. I should be able to do like, we're at 32, so 44 should be viable, yeah. Even 32 should be possible, but that seems a bit optimistic. Like the TWR is completely bugged out at this point. Actually, if I could find where ASRock timing configurator is. Like this is one of the main, yeah, so this is one of the main reasons I don't use ASRock timing configurator is because, yeah. Because the thing is, Intel CPUs, so Intel CPUs have the write recovery, at least modern ones. I think old ones, they actually did it the sort of normal way, but the more modern Intel CPUs, the write recovery is actually handled by this right here, the write to precharge. And so the TWR timing doesn't exist, and this is like calculated based on what your TWR pre is, and well, that calculation breaks down if your TWR pre is low enough, which is what's going on over here. Anyway, so actually, like so the other thing is like the reason not to use ASRock timing configurator is because it doesn't actually show you the WR pre-timing. It shows you TWR, which doesn't really exist, right? Like if you're going to be checking your WR timing, like you actually want to see WR pre, you don't really care about whatever TWR is. And here it just disappears once you set it too low, because ASUS is aware of the issue that if you punch in a really low write pre WR pre, you end up with a totally broken write recovery timing. Anyway, and broken in the sense that like it cannot be calculated because it's not really a thing anymore. I think at this point the only thing that's left to play with is like TRCD, and it's kind of it, because we have a bunch of timings like DR, DD. These are different rank, different DIM, which doesn't apply. We're in a single rank memory configuration here, so the different DIM and different rank timings are not relevant. We can't change cast write latency while we're in the OS. We can't change cast latency while we're in the OS. So at this point, I guess we'll just sort of try lowering the TRFC and seeing where that stops working. And I guess we could also try lower write to read, and I mean, I'll drop those to 19. Let's start mem test. So this one's going to be a very quick one, I guess, which is a good thing, maybe. Let's just check that this isn't completely horrifically unstable right now. The thing is, at 6,800 megabits per second, achieving stability is kind of difficult, especially if your CPU is like this 12900K, which is absolutely terrible. Like, this 12900K on the Tachyon maxes out at like 6600 for 1T command rate. My 12600KF boots 7000 on 1T command rate because of how much better the memory controller on my 12600KF is. There's like a 333 megabit per second gap between them for like max memory speed on like bootable memory speed, which is kind of insane. Anyway, like neither of them is like, well, I think the 66, no, I think I did 6600 1T stable. But anyway, so yeah, like the memory controller on this chip kind of sucks. So that's kind of a concern here with being at 6800. I was considering doing this video at 6600 instead so that we could avoid the memory controller concerns, but that would be a bit lame, I think. Anyway, let's try 311. That's still fine. Man, Hynix DDR5 is just freaking insane with how low the TRFC can go. Not that it really helps you, because if you just max out the refresh interval, like if you have a relatively high refresh interval, the TRFC is used so infrequently that it really doesn't matter that much, but yeah, it can go really, really low. Admittedly, there is error correction for like bits disappearing from the memory cells due to not getting refreshed properly, but most of the other DDR, like I think all of the other DDR5 chips, I managed to get the TRFC low enough to start spewing out errors pretty quickly, and here it keeps going. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so 266 is definitely way too low. Oh, it is very broken now. Wait, let's stop the error flood. Oh, I think there's just like a bunch of corrupted... Yeah, there's probably a bunch of corrupted memory cells at this point, and it just can't fix them. So we're gonna try... Oh, and the test crashed. Okay, so 266 is definitely too low. But that is really, really low. That's like... Actually, that is lower TRFC than like DDR4. By a very, very significant amount. Because on DDR4, your TRFC is like say BDI, you're going to be running a TRFC of like, say, 260 at, say, 2000 megahertz. So that ends up being 260 divided by 2. So 130 nanoseconds. Whereas here, we're doing 3.9 gigahertz memory clock. And we're running... Yeah, like we're basically doing like 260. We're doing like 320 divided by 4. That's like an 80 nanosecond refresh, which is insane. That is absolutely insane. Like, let's just calculate like where it totally glitched out. So 266 divided by our frequency. Yeah, that's a 17 nanosecond refresh. Oh my god. That's like, I think that's like DDR3 territory. Because I can't think, yeah, like even the early DDR3 memory, DDR4 memory chips don't really go below 100 nanosecond refresh cycle. So, though B-die, if you smash a lot of voltage into B-die, you can sometimes run like 200 cycle refresh, like 200 cycle refresh. But yeah, this is really really low. That is insanely freaking low. So yeah, Hynix has made some absolutely incredible DDR5. Um, like this stuff is just unreal in terms of its capabilities. Like the only weakness is the TRCD and TRP timings. Everything else on Hynix DDR5 just goes way too damn low. Like it's great. Um, Unfortunately, the successor to MDI, which should be Hynix ADI, from what I've heard, that apparently, like it clocks way higher, but it doesn't do as low timings. And that is still, like it hasn't hit retail yet, so it'll probably be a while before I get to do a video with that stuff. But like I tried to get some engineering samples and wasn't successful with that, so. Yeah, but Hynix makes some very, like, the thing is, it might be possible that, like, right now, I'd say that, especially for SK Hynix DDR5, the limiting factor for memory speed is the CPU's memory controller, so there's a possibility that the 16 gigabit MDI will be, like, optimal DDR5 even once, like if we just get stronger memory controllers, you might be able to run this stuff at like 7400 or something on air cooling, or 7600. So yeah, in fact, I think there's screenshots of Hynix MDI doing like 8,000 megabits per second on air cooling, but it's like single channel because the typically on basically any motherboard, the inside memory slot is just not as good as the far one. And by that I mean even on like a Unify X, like this the memory slot by the 24 pin is just like that one just clocks a bit higher than the inside memory slot. And every single DDR5 motherboard I've tested like does that. Regardless of what CPU you use, it's just always that DIMM slot is stronger. So yeah, there's a possibility that maybe like better motherboard topologies that like equalizes the strength of the memory channels better, or just a way stronger memory controller, and we'll have like Hynix MDI doing crazy MDI timings at like 7400, 7600 or something, which would be really cool. That would be very cool. TXP to 4. Let's try 200 on this. And I think now what we're going to test is the TRCD limit, which should, like, we should hit that very, very quickly. Actually, just for fun, let's do a quick IDA. Mostly just the latency, because the bandwidth is actually going to be a bit limited by the fact that the CPU is at just 4.8 gigahertz. Like, DDR5 is so fast that an 8-core doesn't pull enough bandwidth. That's 54.2. That's not great. I was expecting a bit better than that, to be completely honest. Yeah, apparently it's not going to get better right now. Yeah, just under 110 gigabytes per second, and I bet if the CPU was at 5.1 gigahertz, it would be over 110. Um, so anyway, let's hit mem test again, and actually instead of testing TRCD, let's test write to read, because the write to read timings are like two timings I've been very careful with DDR5 in general, because like these cause so many issues in my experience. They're horrible. It's like if memory stress tests aren't passing, the first the first couple timings that I'll give up on is like TRRD same group, TRCD. That's also one of the ones that I like first timing to loosen if I'm not passing whatever stress test I want, and then the write to reads. For whatever reason, those are very weak. Anyway, let's do 1777, and start that, and start lowering this a bit. I'm kind of surprised that latency result was so high, though. Because the Unify X... Yeah, these RTLs aren't great. So that's probably it. Unfortunately, I don't know how to fix RTLs on DDR5. I have a video about tweaking RTLs on DDR4 for like gigabyte motherboards, but on DDR5 I have no idea. So yeah, every time I've tried to do anything with the RTLs, things get worse in terms, like massively worse in terms of stability. Either to the point of it doesn't post, or you can't run anything. Anyway, let's try 52. Yeah, okay, so leaving it at 56 was evidently the right decision. So actually, you know what? Let's tweak the TCWL. Yeah, this is the thing, is like I've just used Hynix way too much, so I already like know these sticks very well. Actually, at this point, I'm just going to punch in most of the timings, because, like, waste of time going into the OS and having to punch everything in again and again and again. Oh, that doesn't work? That does. 4, 4, 4. Wait, 4. Oh, it won't let me. Okay, right, yeah. So on Asus boards, you can just punch in 4, but on a lot of, like, RTP is another weird timing with Intel CPUs, where technically there isn't an RTP register. There's a read to pre-register, which is the same thing. Like, RTP stands for read to pre-charge, and then Intel has the read pre-register, which is just RD pre. And the RTP timing in like on Asus motherboards, the RTP timing setting is actually just the RD pre register, but on most other boards, the RTP is not that. And yeah, so that's why it won't let me go below 12, even though you can set it to 4. Like, the Intel's documentation just straight up says, like, yeah, you can set that to 4. It doesn't work at 4 on all memory chips, because it is actually very, very hard to get it. Like, going that low on it is not a given. But yeah, and then we have a bunch of timings that also don't exist, like the cast-to-cast delay. Like, Intel doesn't use these; they just use the read to like that. That's the whole point of the tertiaries. Anyway, so 11.7. Right, yeah, that's our read to read. Then we have, man, the order is, I used an Asus board recently, and so now the timings are all the wrong way. Okay, that's right, that's 9, 7, 19, 19, and 5644. Yeah, so here's your RD pre. You can set that to 4. 32. TXP4. 4, 4. Oh, wait, no, we leave that on 2, 4, 4. And we'll leave the rest of these alone. I'm going to leave the RTLs alone. And yeah, if you were wondering how to, there's your power down disable. So now we're at TCWL26, and we're just going to save and reset, and I'm just going to go straight to the BIOS, because we're going to walk the castle write latency down. Board? I did press save and reset, right? Okay, that looks like it worked. Yeah. Oh, wait. No, it looped. What's it upset about? Oh, don't tell me going from 28 to 26 is literally an... The thing is, the cast write latency does seem to be all over the place depending on the memory sticks, so these might not do it as low as the gigabyte sticks that I have. Those can do a cast write latency of like 16 at 6300, so... So these might be a bit weaker on that. Or I don't have the voltages set correctly at 6800. Okay. Now, is it auto recovery or did it actually train? Okay, yeah, that's auto recovery. I don't think I punched in anything incorrectly. So we'll try boot this at a lower speed, because the thing is, as the timings get tighter, the memory controller can struggle with training. Like, if you make a timing adjustment and it's not working for some reason, the easy, like, a good sanity check is to try boot at a lower frequency. If it doesn't work at a lower speed, you've probably really screwed up your settings. If it does boot at a lower speed, it means you might need more voltage or, like, a better CPU. Yeah. Unfortunately, Hynix MDI overclocking is basically, oh, it doesn't boot, get a better CPU. Okay, so 6600 works. So evidently I didn't make any, like, massive blunder on the settings. So let's try 6666. Like, it might actually just be the CPU being terrible. Well, there's also the option of get a better board, but like, the only better board than, like, a Unify X or a Tachyon is the EVGA Z690 Dark, and that thing is very, very expensive. So, yeah. That's almost as practical an option as get a better CPU. You can probably, like, if you were going for, like, a 12700K, you could probably, you could bin multiple 12700Ks for the price of a Z690 Dark. So, Please boot. I don't think I brought the cast write latency back up, did I? Yeah, no, it just won't freaking train at 6800. Get a better memory controller. What's really frustrating, though, for me when it comes to, like, memory testing is that the 12600 KF is so slow that it lowers memory bandwidth benchmarks. Well, or more like DDR5 provides so much memory bandwidth that with 6 cores, you can't read all of it. Like, if I run IDA at the same settings on the 12600 KF, it's about 5% worse on, like, the read performance and write performance, just because of the core count. Because if I take the 12900K and I disable some cores, the same thing happens. Unfortunately, disabling cores does not make the 12900K's memory controller any less terrible. So, yeah. Like, right now, the limiting factor for DDR5 is memory controller and motherboard. It's at least... Well, for Micron DDR5, the limiting factor is the DDR5 itself. But for Samsung, Samsung is probably still also the memory chips themselves. But for Hynix DDR5, the limiting factor is your motherboard and or CPU. Or more like both. So yeah, that's great. Because what are we trying to boot right now? Yeah, it is at 26. So I guess we're going down to 6666 because this CPU is garbage. Also, before somebody says I should sell it, this is a review sample from Intel. So technically speaking, I'm not supposed to do that. But I am allowed to complain about the terrible quality memory controller on it. So, yeah. Yeah, it just won't train at 6800. Because I bet, like, I think, well, we'll see. If I can drop the cast write latency, like, another 4-6 ticks at 6666, then it's a memory controller problem, and it's not a timing problem. If I can't lower the cast write latency significantly, then actually it might be that these sticks have a really... high cast write latency floor, but I kind of doubt that. Also, another issue if you're like right at the limits of your CPU's memory controller, your round trip latency training is going to generally get really bad. So, the IDA latency might have been partially affected by the fact that 6800 on this CPU is really up there. Yeah, no, it's not the cast write latency, it's just the memory controller being trash. Thank you for nothing, you useless CPU. Well, 18 then? Now, practically speaking, I would, like, if I was tuning this for daily, I would probably give up on some of the timings to get 6800 to work, rather than dropping down to 6666 to get... Well, see, this is a hard one, because if your memory controller is, like, right at its limits at 6800, and there's a decent chance you might have retrain instability. So trying to even, like, stabilize the 6800 setup might be a lost cause. Also, 18 is apparently too low at 6666 on the cast write latency. Which I figured as much, because I don't think I could go below 16 at 6300-ish, something like that, on the other Hynix DIMMs. So it would be weird if we could go, yeah, it would be kind of weird if I could go as low at 6666 as I could at 6300. Well, at least the board's auto recovery is pretty strong. Or not pretty strong. Like, it's actually really strong. Like, it recovers a lot faster than some of the other DDR5 boards. Yeah, so we've hit the auto recovery again. So I guess cast write latency 2022 is probably the limit for this. We'll go with 22, just to give it a little bit of margin. And yeah, that's kind of the thing is like if your CPU is like barely doing 6800, it might actually just be better to. Because the thing is, at 6800, you might have serious retrain stability where it's like, oh, sometimes it does work and sometimes it doesn't. Whereas if you just drop the speed a bit, that'll generally clear up retrain stability a lot faster than trying to fiddle with the timings. And in my experience, that does not work. Because retrain instability is primarily a frequency problem, not a timing issue. Also, I've never seen this get stuck on 16 before, so that's interesting. And retrain instability isn't like the inability to boot, it's the ability to boot and then run a stress test and randomly be completely unstable. Yeah, so that fired right up. I don't think we hit the auto recovery. I don't think it triggers from holding the power button. Or does it? Yeah, no, it doesn't. So yeah, like SK Hynix DDR5 is like really strong on all of the right timings, right? Because the same thing you see you see something similar in the tertiaries where like your right to right delay can be like super duper short compared to basically any other DDR5 memory chip out there. By which I'm talking about the whole like, come on, open. There we go. Yeah, this 9 right here, that's a Hynix thing. That is very much a Hynix thing. Nothing else does that right now. And then, of course, the crazy low cast write latency. Also, what are our RTLs right now? Still kind of terrible, actually. Oh, well. So yeah, now we're going to check out the TRCD limits. Because, yeah, we're as low as you can be on basically every timing there is at this point. 7.7. You know, before I start that, let's see how IDA does. Kind of wondering about the latency right now. Oh, it got worse. Actually, that's probably just IDA being really inconsistent. I should have used memory latency checker. You know what? That's actually a good idea. Okay, well, yeah. Oh, and now it's better. Yeah, IDA is an incredible memory latency benchmark. Like, just going to hit it with memory latency checker. Because the thing is, this is way more consistent. Like, you can run, well, as long as you don't have a bunch of crap open in the background. Which this OS is definitely not ideal for, but it's not so bad that, like, like, the nice thing with Intel Memory Latency Checker is that it tests a bunch of different, like, scenarios of latency, so you can see... So if there's some minor background task that, like, screws over one of the tests, like, you can just ignore that result and, you know... Yeah, because if like I started opening a folder or something, we would immediately see that whichever inject delay scenario was running at the same time as the folder opening, like that would be the only inject delay that would get affected by that. And also just generally this is very, very consistent. Oh, the latency is just straight up bad. Yeah, for like memory latency checker, the goal is to be under 50 nanoseconds. So this right here is not great. That is interesting. Because I remember the Unify X actually being like like really strong for the latency. But that is, yeah, 49.45 is really not that great. Interesting. Like, it's not a bad result. It's just like I don't know, I was expecting like a 47 or something. Anyway, let's go mess with TRCD. Obviously, we need to wait for this to start up. So at 6666, the TRCD really shouldn't be able to go below 39, even with 1.5 volts. So, or, well, it might do 38, but it probably won't be stable at all. So anyway, we'll do, like generally on Hynix DDR5, your TRCD and TRP can be very similar. Your TRP will sometimes go one tick below TRCD, but generally not more than that. Oh, it's doing 38. That's surprising. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So let's try TRP 37. Yeah, okay, that is bad. That is very bad. There's a lot of errors. So it's interesting. Yeah, like, so you might you probably like you might remember earlier in the video when I like dropped the TRFC and then I started pulling the TRFC back up, the errors just kind of kept piling up even as I was bringing the TRFC back into like the good rate, like into a stable range. And that's because TRFC will just straight up corrupt the data inside the memory cells permanently. Whereas, like, I think TRP won't necessarily corrupt whatever's in the memory. It'll just cause read and write issues. So when you're reading back the data, it'll probably read incorrectly. So yeah, I don't think we're getting any more errors right now. But I want to try TRCD 37 because I think that'll just blue screen instantly. So we already know 38 was not very happy. Let's try 37. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's actually kind of doing okay-ish with 37 for a little bit. 36? Yeah, 36 not going to happen. Okay. So, yeah, that's like, unfortunately, so this is a short one because I actually know how Hynix DDR5 behaves. So that's kind of it. You know what? We'll actually try slightly lower cast latency. Come on. Okay, yeah, I crashed it hard. Like, it might be possible to run 28, I'm not sure if 1.5 volts is enough, but it might be possible to do like 28, 39, 38, based on how that just behaved. Let's try 28, 30, 38. There we go. If this doesn't work, the easy fix would be to just shove more voltage into it. So yeah, like, and by more voltage, mostly just the VDD. Like, it doesn't even need more VDDQ, because the VDDQ is primarily used for driving the I/O portion of them. Well, as far as I know, is literally the I/O portion of the memory chip. Whereas the VDD is the actual core. And when you're tweaking the like CAS latency, TRCD, TRP, that affects the core portion of the memory chip, not really the outputs. So you can actually run like really low VDDQ in some scenarios relative to VDD. At the same time, you shouldn't have a super huge gap between them, because the memory chips aren't really designed to have like a really big difference between their two voltage regions, as far as I know. So the JDEC documentation straight up says like you can like the memory chips won't necessarily survive if you have like a really huge gap between VDD and VDDQ. So yeah, right now I have both at 1.5 volts. But what we're going to do is we're probably going to bump up the VDD to 1.6, which is still fine. I don't like 100 millivolts gap between VDD and VDDQ shouldn't be a problem. I wouldn't go over like what I wouldn't do is if we unlink these. Oh, and this is so annoying. We need to do it per. Yeah, we need to do it per memory stick. Anyway, so I wouldn't do like a what? 1.4, 1.4, 1.6. Like, this is probably going to be bad for your memory. Something like this should be okay. I say should because, well, at 1.6 volts, you really want a fan on the RAM. Because it's going to get hot. Like, but, it shouldn't, like, having a 1.6, 1.5 volt difference, like 1.6 to 1.5 volts on VDD and VDDQ shouldn't damage the memory sticks, as that is still technically within the, like, voltage regulation specifications for DDR5. And that fires right up. Yeah, so you just need a lot of voltage for low primary timings. Unfortunately, all of your other timings go really low already at like 1.4 volts, so mashing more voltage into your Hynix DIMMs really doesn't really, like, it doesn't really do much, because everything else already, like, at 1.4 volts, you should be basically at the lowest possible timings for everything except your primaries and the write to read timings. So we might be able to go below write to read 5644 right now. So yeah, 28, 39, 38. So now 52, yeah, now 52 is possible, and 40 also possible, but I think less than that won't work at all. Actually, we might be able to lower the CAS write latency a little bit as well, because that's also affected by the VDD voltage. Anyway, let's quickly hit memory latency checker. Yeah, so that 54 that just popped up, that's probably because the OS is a mess. And like right after startup, it's still doing things, so. Hey, we've hit sub 50 on 1700 inject delay instead of a bit later, which makes sense. Primaries came, like, I've pulled the primaries down quite a bit. 49 nanoseconds. We should be able to hit like a mid 48, maybe. Oh, actually got 47. Nice. Yeah, so that's like a good result. Or the RTLs. Oh, the RTLs are so much better now. Yeah, because I lowered the cast latency a bunch. Anyway, let's hit mem test. How stable is this? Okay-ish so far. I think if we tried testmem5 though, it would fall over because testmem5 hits the memory controller a lot harder than memtest does. Oh, so that's not doing too badly. And now that we have more VDD voltage, it might even be possible to run TRCD38. Is it? Because the TRCD does actually scale with the VDD voltage, but just not a lot. Like, not as much as cast latency. Yeah, so... There, this is kind of viable. 1T command rate can also work on this board, but you need a good memory controller, and yeah, this CPU doesn't have one of those, so... And also, you can't change the command rate while you're in the operating system, so we'd have to reboot, and I don't think there's much point in doing that. Let's try 50 on that. Oh, and doing it while memtest running was probably not the best idea. But anyway, that's basically the limits of SK Hynix DDR5 right now. Like, it's really... Like, all of your timings go low. Pretty much, all of them. The speed that you can run is entirely limited by how good or bad, like, your motherboard and your CPU. There's, like, you know, like, a lot of these timings were actually hitting the limit of the, like, registers on the CPU. Which I'm not entirely certain that the Intel documentation, like, how accurate the Intel documentation is on the value limits of various timings, because I have seen some tests that show that TRRD can actually go below 4, like at 3, you still pick up performance, which doesn't line up with the Intel documentation, which says that you shouldn't be able to set TRRD below 4, but yeah, it's hard to argue with benchmarks. Let's just put it that way, but anyway, like, so yeah, TRRD 4 is, at least according to the Intel documentation, as low as you can set it. TFAW 16 is as low as you can go. Cast write latency 22 isn't as low as you can go, but it is very low. TCKE 4 is as low as it can go. I'm pretty sure it is not possible to have a read-to-read different group of less than 7. I think actually any of these back-to-back timings, it shouldn't be possible to have them at less than 7. Just because these timings control the delay between, like, back-to-back. Like, this is back-to-back read burst. So... Like, you can't just, like, at some point, you're going to be trying to read data over data that's currently being read if the read-to-read timings get too low. So, yeah, like, while these aren't at the, like, limit of the registers, I am pretty sure you can't go below 7 with DDR5 because the bursts are 16 bits long, which takes 8 clock cycles. So... Yeah, how 7-cycle read-to-read works, I don't know. There's probably some, like, extra latency somewhere that I'm not aware of that's added to that, but yeah. Write-to-write same group at 9 is just insanely low. These generally don't go low just because read-to-write transitions require some realignment of the data. Relative to the clock, but these also go very low depending on what voltage you're at. And, like, a lot of this is minimized. Your WR pre is about as low as it's ever gonna get. Like, yeah, Hynix DDR5 is kind of it is currently the peak of DDR5. Um, it clocks higher than everything else. It does, like, the only timing that you could potentially complain about is the TRCD and TRP. These two don't go very low compared to some of the other memory chips, but everything else does. And so, yeah, Hynix DDR5 is currently the peak of DDR5. The only real limiting factor you're going to have is like the silicon quality of whatever Hynix DIMMs you have. As far as I can tell, they're kind of all over the place, and there's not really, like, I wouldn't bother buying like a super high aggressive XMP of Hynix because I've seen really good results even from like OEM Hynix sticks, like green PCB Hynix memory sticks, for I think Dell desktops. There's people who have really good results with those, so it seems that the ICs are relatively consistent in terms of like what kind of speeds they can hit, and then the timings seem to just kind of be, especially the primaries, seem to be a bit all over the place. In terms of like how low you can push the TRCD and CAS latency. Because I've heard of sticks that do TCL28 at 1.5 volts at higher speeds than this, but you know, like this doesn't. It could also be limited by the CPU, but I don't think it is. The CPU shouldn't really affect your, like, it shouldn't really affect how low you can push the CAS latency. But then again, this 12900K's memory controller is incredibly terrible, so who knows, maybe it does. Yeah, so there, that's it for the video. Like, this is why I've been making a bunch of like Hynix overclocking videos for like the last several months, is just like, it's the best DDR5 there is. If you have other DDR, like, if you care about performance, buy Hynix. It's really that simple. And the easiest way to find Hynix DDR5 is high-speed kits, which unfortunately are rather expensive. But you want like this Corsair kit is like 6200, 3639, and there is a retail version of the speed bin. The main thing you want to avoid is low TRCD. If you see a memory kit where you've got like the primary timings are like 36, 36, 36, that's probably Samsung, because 36 TRCD on Hynix for XMP is not really a thing. So yeah, like, you want to avoid 36, 36, 36. And actually, you're more likely to get Hynix in something like a 6040, 40, 40 than in you're never going to get a Hynix in a 6000, 36, 36, 36. That's just never going to happen. So like, Samsung memory chips are, funnily enough, kind of good for XMP because they do good primary, like they do slightly lower primary timings than Hynix chips. But in terms of tertiary timings, the Hynix chips just kind of crush everything else that exists. So if you're going to manually tune your memory, you want Hynix. And if you want to turn on and I've also heard that the Samsung memory chips have like awful XMP reliability, but they do 6000, 36, 36, 36. So sometimes on some other boards with some CPUs. Yeah, like, if you're doing manual overclocking, you want memory kits rated either 6200 or higher, because Samsung doing 6200 is possible. It's just incredibly hard at like XMP levels of stability, because there is like, I know I say XMP is trash, and it is in terms of performance, but the like stability and validation requirements for XMP are pretty stringent. And so you're not, as far as I know, you won't get a 6200 rated Samsung stick, because while Samsung sticks can do 6200, they suck at it like really badly. So they're not going to make XMP profiles with that like that, because they're going to be incredibly unreliable. They're already unreliable at 6000, 36, 36, 36, but at 6200, it would just be so much worse. So, like, high speed, like 6200, 6400 rated kits, pretty much regardless of what the timings are, as long as the TRCD is somewhat high. And by somewhat high, I mean like 39 or higher. You're pretty much guaranteed to get Hynix in that. Like, yeah. And then you can go and take your Hynix DDR5 and basically do settings like what I've shown here in this video, because Like, I have 3 different kits of Hynix DDR5. They all do basically the same secondaries and tertiaries. Like, the back-to-back timings and the primary, like, secondary timings, those all are very, very similar across basically the entire speed range. The only big differences between them is, like, what kind of TRCD they can do, what kind of cast latency they can do, and what kind of voltage they can do those primary timings at. So, yeah, anyway, that's it for the video. Thank you to Corsair for the memory kit. Thank you to MSI for the motherboard. Thank you to Intel for the CPU. And thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the HOC Teespring store where there's like shirts, hoodies, posters, you know, the usual YouTuber merch. And then I also have a Bandcamp, which you might want to check out. There's links to all of that down in the description. It would be much appreciated if you'd check them out. And that's it for the video. So thank you for watching and goodbye.